All right. So I got my good friend Jeff up here with me today, and many of you know Jeff. You've heard Jeff speak before, and so I am excited to get to do this one together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning.
And not 1 week, but you have us for 2 weeks. How amazing is that? Come on.
We'll see if they come back.
I think that was nervous laughter. It was like, oh no, what did we get ourselves into? Next week, it's going to be no one here. So, if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Luke chapter 22. And a couple things here as we get started. First off, you're probably wondering, why is the projector, why is it up there so dim? So we did have a technical glitch this morning, and luckily Mike saved us, and he ran home and grabbed the projector. Yes. And then last week, Tony Hillary, the founder and director of Harlem Grown, was here speaking to us about what he does down in the Bronx and an opportunity for us to get involved. And so originally we were hoping for May. We had to kind of push it back a little bit. So June the 30th, it is a Saturday, and we will be taking a trip down together to check out Harlem Grown and what Tony has going on down there. So mark your calendars. June the 30th, there's plenty of time to put this one on your calendar. And if you missed last week, the podcast is up online, the audio, so go home, listen to it, listen to what's happening down there, and you'll be blown away by it. So I really hope that you can join us. We'll have more info on the newsletter about how you can sign up for that one. So we're in this season of Lent, and today is week 4 of Lent. And Lent is this season in which we embrace our humanness. We embrace our smallness. We remember our dependence upon God for our very breath, for the very life that we've been given. And so we've been exploring a whole bunch of different themes during the Lent season. And today what we want to do is we want to talk about grief. And one of the best definitions that we came across on grief, I have it up here on the slide. Hopefully you can read it. Hopefully I can read it. Go to the next slide. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern or behavior. So as we started talking about this, I think one of the things that we realized early on is that as a culture, we really don't know how to talk about grief. And so we thought, let's just begin a conversation about grief. Let's talk about some of our experiences with it, what we've noticed, what we've seen, some misconceptions about grief. How do we actually grieve? And then how do we help others who are in the midst of grieving? And I remember I experienced a traumatic loss when I was in college. And one of the things that struck me early on was just how the people around me didn't really know what to say. People around me didn't really know what to do. They didn't know what to do with the fact that I had just experienced this great loss and I was in the midst of grieving. And then I was a pastor, and I remember one of the first things that I did was going to someone's funeral. And I just remember how I wasn't given the tools to help someone walk through their time of grieving. I'd gone to seminary and you learned all about it, but then you get thrown into this situation and you have to start learning, how do you come alongside someone who is grieving? Because this isn't something that we normally talk about. And I know you had an experience as well that kind of struck you as odd a couple of years back.
Yeah, so so I was in the gym one time, and that story? Is that what we're talking about? And this was going back probably 10, 15 years. And there was a woman in the gym I'd become friendly with just because you're there all the time, so you make new friends all over the place. And she happened to be a Christian. So there were times when we would chat for a few minutes and go about our workouts. And one day I saw her, and I overheard her talking to someone else. and she had mentioned, I heard her say that she had just lost her mom. And I was like, oh my gosh, she lost her mom. I was like, wow. So I went up to her after she was done talking to her friend, and I said, listen, I'm really, really sorry to hear that you lost your mom. Were you guys close? And she was like, yeah, we were really close. I talked to her every day. I saw her all the time. We were really, really close. I said, well, how are you doing with that? Are you, And she was like, I'm fine. I'm doing fine. She's like, I know where my mom is, and I know she's with Jesus, and I'm doing fine. And I was thinking to myself, and I was like, I don't know, something just resonated inside that it didn't click right. I mean, here's your mom that you're really, really close with, and you just lost her, and you're doing fine? I was like, wow, okay. I mean, everybody handles things differently. But when I heard that, I realized, wow, this really is, whether you're inside the church atmosphere or outside, it's such a tough place to go for all of us.
I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to start this conversation. I remember there's this great Old Testament theologian, and he gave a lecture a while ago, and he said the church should not be the happiest place in town. It should be the most honest place in town. And that's our goal, not only for these 2 weeks, but that's why I started Awaken, that this would be the most honest place where we can really talk about the things that we struggle with. We can talk about the things in life that are difficult, that are hard, the things that often go untalked about. That this would be a place of healing and a safe place for us to explore all the emotions and feelings that are a part of the human journey. Because grief is something that is universal to all of us. It doesn't just strike one person, but yet it hits us all at different times throughout our lives. So we understand that we're just scratching the surface. These 2 weeks that we have here, it's just the beginning of a conversation. And that's what I think every sermon really is. It's just the first word in a conversation. And my hope, my prayer for every sermon is that it would spark other conversations. And so we're going to have opportunities to talk about this outside of just here on Sunday morning. We have our community groups. We do have one that's going to be meeting today. We'll be talking through some of what we talk about today. And then also, we even threw around the idea of possibly having a specific group, just to kind of unpack some of these ideas here. So that's definitely something that we would be open to if there was interest in that one. So I think Jesus gives us a great model for someone who didn't push aside grief, who didn't push aside what he was feeling. So let's look at Luke chapter 22. And I believe this is, go to the next slide quickly. This is, one more. Okay, maybe not. What? I can't see. So 39. Yes. So we're going to be in verse 39. So Jesus went out as usual. This is the end of Jesus' life. He's just celebrated this final meal, and now he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He's got a couple of disciples with him. So he goes to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Now on reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." So he withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them. Don't you love that description? About a stone's throw. How far is a stone's throw? Is that like the Rock stone's throw? Or is that like Thumbelina? I don't know where that came from. Thumbelina. Goodness gracious. Wait. It's all good. So, Father, and he knelt down and he began to pray. He said, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Notice, his prayer is, I really don't want to go through this. He knows what's about to happen. He knows the pain. He knows what's facing him in these next moments. He knows, if I'm to go through with this, it's going to be awful. And so his prayer is not, I'm so thrilled. So often we hear, and I think this is in church. Well, I'm so excited to do this because it's God's will. But yet even Jesus is like, if there's any other way, can it change? I don't want to experience this. And he continues, or an angel from heaven appeared to him and then strengthened him. And being in anguish, such a raw emotion. Notice, Jesus is in anguish. Another translation says he is in agony. He prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Think of the anguish, the agony, the pain, the grief that he was experiencing so much that he was sweating drops of blood. This was not an easy moment for Jesus. Jesus, fully human, fully divine, sweating drops of blood. So when he rose from prayer, he went back to the disciples. He found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. Have you ever been exhausted from sorrow? Have you ever experienced this? And so Jesus is expecting his disciples to be there to support him. Give him a glass of water. Maybe they have some food left over from that last meal that they all shared together. And so he's exhausted from sorrow, and he finds them asleep. Why are you sleeping? Could you imagine Jesus here, expecting his disciples to be there so he could talk with them? Maybe they would have something to encourage him, and yet he finds them asleep. It's almost as if he's been abandoned emotionally by those who are closest to him. And so he asks them, get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. Yeah, this is Jesus who gives us a model for how to grieve, for how to fully enter into all that we're experiencing. I remember I went to Israel, and my Hebrew professor, we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he took us through that final walk of Jesus, and he took us down into one of these jail cells that was down underground. And it was many, many steps that you would have to go down in order to get to this jail cell. And we were there, and it was dark. And he said, this is what the jail cell where Jesus stayed before he was brought before Pilate, this is what the jail cell would have looked like. Now, there was a light in here at this point, but he said that years ago, there would have been no light. In other words, Jesus would have been there by himself in the dark, abandoned, alone. And then he went on and he said that it was his belief that the 88th Psalm might have been a prayer, might have been a psalm that Jesus recited when he was down there in the jail cell by himself. I just want to read really quick, not the whole psalm, but a couple pieces of it. This is the 88th Psalm, and it starts, Lord, you're the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. It goes on, I'm like one without strength. I'm set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave. Go to the next slide. You've put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Go to the next slide. I call out to you, but do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? Is this a happy psalm? The psalm continues. Go to the next slide. I cry to you, why, Lord, do you reject me? Why do you hide your face from me? Have you ever gone through such a crushing moment and it feels as if God has hidden his face from you? You're not alone. You're not alone. It's actually a very common feeling where it feels like even God himself has turned his face from you. If we go to the next slide, from my youth I've suffered. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Notice, this is how the psalm ends. There's no Disney ending. There is no happy ending to the psalm. I think maybe we need to spend more time praying psalms, praying prayers like this. So often we can sugarcoat everything, and it's like, well, it's going to be okay because, no, this is actually how the 88th Psalm ends. Darkness is my closest friend. And we find this right here in the Hebrew Scriptures, right in the Bibles that we read, the Bibles that we follow, that we look to for guidance, for wisdom, to understand what does it mean to have a relationship with God. Darkness is my closest friend. See, the Psalms, 65, maybe 66 out of 150 Psalms are considered laments. That's over 1/3 of the Psalms that are considered these prayers or songs of lament. Psalmists, regular people like you and me, human people like you and me, crying out in anguish and in pain, not trying to hide it, not trying to run from it, but saying, this is where I am, and it's awful. And I think the Psalms, right here in our Bibles, they provide for us this beautiful, gut-wrenching picture of brutal honesty. Now, the Psalms, sometimes they can seem a little ancient to us, because after all, they were written a couple thousand years ago. But I think we see models like this all the time in our current art. And one such art form is this TV show called This Is Us. Have any of you seen that show? Do any of you follow that show? All right, so I see a couple hands. Some people threw 2 hands up in the air because they're just that excited about it. Others, a couple head nods. So Jeff is, from what I understand, a huge fan of this show.
I've become a huge fan. I have. I got to be honest. I started seeing, I'm not on Facebook that much, but it seemed for a time, anytime you went on Facebook, people were commenting about this show, This Is Us. And originally at the time, it seemed to be mostly women and how their emotions were being moved, and they need a box of Kleenex anytime that they watched the show, and they just loved it, right? Is that what happens? And but little by little, then you started seeing guys comment too. And it was probably close to the end of the first season, I think, after seeing some of this stuff. And I was like, what is this show? Maybe I should check it out. And, they kept talking about how if you're going to watch it, be prepared because your emotions are going to be moved and the potential is you might cry. And I was like, I'm not watching that show. Forget that. But eventually I was like, let me check this out. So I think it was probably one of the last or second to last episode where I started with season 1, episode 1. And I started watching this show, and I'm like, oh, this is a pretty good show. I mean, I'm trying to follow it. So for those of you that have watched it, it goes from present to like they're small kids to when they're born to like teenage. I mean, it's all over the place. And at first I was like, do these producers and directors and stuff know what they're doing? Because I can't follow. Like, it was really confusing at first. But the more you watch it and the more it kind of takes on its own form, I started to get hooked. But I still wasn't like necessarily feeling anything just yet until like the 15th or 16th episode, something like that. I guess it had just built up. I'm not sure, but watching one of those episodes at that point, I kind of felt a little tear fall down from my eyes. And I was like, wow, there's something to this. And so as Dave and I were talking about this, the thought was, this show, This Is Us, is really, really moving people. There's something to this. So, and it's become so popular, almost like its own phenomenon. So I said, you know what? Let's put out like a quick questionnaire. So I put out a questionnaire on Facebook as to, why is it that you like it? What keeps bringing you back to watch it? What moves you, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, there were a ton of responses. And I got to be honest, I thought mostly would be women. It was kind of equal, women and men. So everybody watches this show, not just women. It's kind of hooked for us guys too. And there were so many different responses that came. But there was kind of a general theme in all of them. You know, there's like this.
We have two of the responses.
Oh, do we?
Sure, we do.
Okay. Look at that.
Yeah. A little blurry. It's like you're at the eye doctor, right? It's like, which one's better, this one or this one?
I think it's real and relatable to many people. A story of a perfectly imperfect family growing up. The family dynamics I find intriguing. I can relate to losing my father very suddenly at a relatively young age, being adopted, addiction, body image, etc. Most people can relate to many of those things. It's pieces of everyone's lives. A great show.
Actually, go back two more also. There's one right in front of this one. Yes, this one as well.
Having similar experiences as the characters, I relate to Kate's weight issues and how she deals with them, and the episode where she lost her baby was one of the most gut-wrenching for me, as I had just lost another baby myself. It's crazy when you watch this show because it's almost as though there's so much in these characters that are part of who we are. Maybe we didn't experience those situations in particular, but the feelings of whatever the situations we've gone through, we can resonate with it. You know, it's like like one of them said, it's a perfectly imperfect family just trying to make it. And how when you watch this show, so many of them, they struggle with being honest. They struggle with what they're going through. Then they talk about it. Then they're dealing with it. There's so many of it that goes on like that. And it's like how it is for so many of us. And one of the characters in particular, do we have the clip? Yeah. So one of the characters in particular finally gets to a point where he can't take it anymore. He's been stuffing down these emotions. He's been pushing it aside. He's been turning to other things. He's been doing all this stuff. And in this clip, we'll preface it by... Did we? No?
So, yeah, we were talking about this, and I understand this clip. So we're going to rate this clip TV 14. Is that okay with us? I'll try to do a little editing here, but just a disclaimer here. But I think this is what happens when your emotions come out. There's no filter sometimes, and I think that's just honesty, and I think that's just life. Oh, it's going to take us a minute to get to the clip. So, okay, we'll get there in a minute, but I want to talk about one more thing. Let's talk about Brene Brown, shall we?
Sure.
Okay. So, Brene Brown, we have showed parts of her TED Talk for many, many times, and she has, I think it's the most watched TED Talk of all time, over 33 million views. And she has this one quote in there: "You cannot selectively numb emotion. When we numb hard feelings, we numb joy, we numb gratitude, and we numb happiness." In other words, when we try to numb or avoid or run from those difficult feelings, the feelings that we'd rather not feel, by doing so, we actually end up numbing our ability to experience joy and gratitude and happiness. And I just find that so interesting because I feel like there's so many ways that we try to numb the feelings that we wish we weren't having. Anyone else? Have you ever experienced this before? Now, this can happen in so many different ways. I was reading an article about surgery in Germany. And there was a woman who lived here in California. She moved to Germany, and she was going to have fairly minor surgery. Still, we're going to have to cut her open and put her under. And after the surgery, she was asking the doctors, well, am I going to be able to have Vicodin? Can I have a prescription for Vicodin so I can have these painkillers when I go home? And they're like, no, we don't do that around here. We'll give you a couple of painkillers right after the surgery, right after the operation, but then you can just take Tylenol when you go home. And she's like, what? And so she started asking the anesthesiologist, the doctor, this other surgeon, and they all said the same thing. They all said, no, we're just going to tell you to go home and take Tylenol. And one of them said, we do this so that you can let the pain guide you. Your body knows what it needs to heal. You have to trust your body. And whenever you just take the Vicodin and all these painkillers, you're numbing what it is that your body is telling you to do. And I think so often we do not allow our bodies, we don't allow our emotions to guide how we navigate life, because we try to run from them. We try to numb them, and there's all sorts of different ways. I know we talked about a bunch, whether it's food or noise, busyness, whatever the case might be. But I just love how they do surgery in Germany. You're like, no, you're going to let the pain guide you. And you're going to, if you're hurting, you're going to express it. You're going to, rather than just numbing.
And that's not an easy thing to do either, Allow the pain to guide you and just feel it. It's really not. I mean, that's why for so many of us, we do try and numb it, And honestly, sometimes it feels a little better to be numb, to not have to feel that pain, right? I mean, because it's so painful. But sometimes there comes a point when we can't numb it anymore or turn to other things or whatever it is, and it has to come out. And sometimes it's beyond our control to try and keep it in. And sometimes it's just one thing. It doesn't have to take something huge. Could take just one thing. You're driving down the road listening to a song, and there's one word in that song, or the way the chord was struck, or you just drive by a sign and you read, whatever that is. Sometimes it's just one thing that can trigger it. And so, do we have the clip? Yeah. So the clip, real quick, there was just one thing for this certain character that ended up triggering for him this feeling of these emotions. And you'll notice in the end of the clip, they flash back to when they were teenagers. So he's dealing with a whole bunch of different emotions, and they're trying to show that this isn't just from today. This goes way, way, way back.
Charlotte? Hey, Charlotte. Hey. Charlotte, it's Kevin. I left my dad's necklace. I need to come in for a few seconds and look for it, okay? Charlotte!
Kevin!
Charlotte!
Are you out of your mind? Coming back here, you...
Necklace belongs to my father, okay? And I need you to come in for a second and look for it.
Screw you.
Just hold it. That necklace, it's the only thing I have left in my life from my dad. It's the only thing I have. I know it's up there. It's a wheel pendant on a little chain. It's on your bedroom floor. It's from where you tore my shirt off. I know
Is it more of my neighbors?
Just go look for it, please.
I don't have your damn necklace. Now leave me alone.
Please, listen to me. I understand you're upset that I left, okay? It had nothing to do with you, all right? I'm paying out here. I'm paying you, okay? I just need somebody to help me. I just need somebody to help me. I just need help, please. I just need somebody to please help me.
I just need somebody to please help me. Sometimes that is so, so tough for us to get to the point to say. For this character, though, it was just that one pendant. He thought he lost it. Well, he did lose it. And he needed to have that connection, and it just opened up so much, so many emotions for him. But the interesting thing is, at the end of the clip, it showed that he was coming around the turn in the hospital in the wheelchair. Both of his parents were next to him, and his brother and sister were in front of him. And that was a flashback from like 20 years earlier, where he had this dream, this vision for his life where he was going, and it was all about football. He was like an amazing, amazing football player. And he ended up getting injured on a play, and he hurt his knee, and he was never able to play again. And his whole future, in an instant, all of his hopes, all of his dreams were gone. And sometimes, when we talk about grief, we immediately think of somebody that we lost. They've passed away, but it's not always like that. But the interesting thing in this clip is at the end, when he comes around the turn, the show isn't named This Is Me or This Is I. It's named This Is Us. And he comes around the turn with his parents behind him and his brother and sister in front of him. And in the midst of one of the most darkest times for him when he was a teenager, he had his family around him, he had people around him. He didn't have to go through it alone. So feeling like that, sometimes it normalizes our pain. Sometimes it helps us to kind of go through stuff. And maybe it's not family members that can be around us. Maybe it's friends. Sometimes it's strangers. But just to have people around us in that clip, I thought was so awesome for him. But sometimes for some of us, we don't have that, and it makes it even more difficult to talk about.
So last fall, when I had that season of exhaustion, I remember beginning to sort through everything that I was feeling, everything that I was experiencing, and as I started thinking through and talking through why I had gotten to this place, one of the things that started to come up was that as much as I love this new season of being a dad, as much as I love this new season of having this little child around the house, there was also a part of me that was wishing for what life was like before. Because there's way less responsibility. You have way more freedom. I got to spend way more time with Steph. We could go away on vacation. We could take day trips. And so I love this new season, but yet there was still a part of me that was wishing for what life was like before. And I realized that some of this stress, some of the anxiety that I was feeling, well, it came about because I hadn't fully grieved that old season of life. And I think, like you were talking about, yes, we need to grieve when we lose someone, but there's so many more things that we need to allow ourselves to grieve. And so often, we can't fully live into another season or a new dream or a new way of life because we still have a foot in the past. We still have a foot in an old season. And I remember that as I started acknowledging this, because I was blind to it, and then I started exploring it and probing it and realized, oh, this is part of what's going on here. And as I started being honest about it, as I started allowing myself to feel that and to actually grieve what I had lost, even though it was a beautiful thing this new season, when I was allowing myself to say, wow, there's still a part of me that hasn't fully let go of this old season, I found myself feeling more alive. And I found myself being able to be more fully present in this new season that I find myself in. I found some of the stress and the anxiety begin to slowly dissipate. Now, it's not all gone. I mean, grieving is a process. It takes time, and that's totally okay. We're going to talk about some misconceptions next week. But I began to realize that as I was honest with what I was going through, what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, it was almost as if something began to lift off of me. And so that's our hope for these couple of weeks, these 2 weeks that we have here, is that this would be a space where maybe you would gain some awareness to some areas in your life that maybe you haven't fully grieved. That this would be a space. I think that's one of the beautiful things about This Is Us, is that it allows the space for all of us to grieve. And it says, you know what? How you're feeling, it's okay. It's all right. It's actually, not is it just okay, but it's actually normal. It's the most normal thing imaginable. You're not alone in how you're feeling. And so that's our prayer for this, is that we would all realize it's okay to acknowledge what we've lost in life and to be honest about how we're feeling and to not run or numb or hide, but find a space of people who will support us in how we're feeling.
I just remember real quick, it was a long time ago, and I was talking with a buddy of mine, and I don't know how we got into it, but we were talking about the busyness, how one of the things could be busyness, and I'm always busy. Like, I could find things to do everywhere. And he made a comment to me, and he was like, well, why don't you slow down for a little bit? And I was like, well, why? And he's like, well, if you slow down, then, things get quiet, and you get to spend some time with yourself. And I was like, myself? Why would I want to do that? But it was really interesting because sometimes when things quiet down and we don't actually realize the emotions that will come up. And so keeping ourselves busy and stuff can sometimes help to stay away from that stuff. So just be aware that as things at times will quiet down, because sometimes we're not even aware as we're talking about things like this, and it's just scratching the surface, that there may be something we didn't even think about. It could have been something minor, but whatever that is, in that quietness at times, whatever it is, driving without the radio on, I hate doing that. I always like to have the radio on. But when you shut it off and it's quiet, whatever that quietness is, sometimes things can pop up. And like Dave said, it's just a time to begin conversations on this. Because this is a really tough area for so many of us, and it's a really tough topic to talk about because we're dealing with our emotions, And for some of us guys, that's not an easy thing to deal with, is our emotions. We've learned, to stuff it down, we're strong, we don't have to feel that stuff, but it's the same for us as it is for women. It's across the board. It's a human thing.
So we're going to have the worship team come on up here. We're going to sing one more song together, and we're going to be up in the front here, and Steph's going to come up to the front as well. And if anyone would like prayer, maybe this jostled something, we would love to be able to pray for you and to be there to support you. So we'll be up front, so if anyone would like prayer, we'd love to just be able to pray with you. Let me pray here for us. God, I thank you that we can be here together. God, I know this isn't an easy topic. God, I know this is something that it's difficult for all of us. And God, I pray that these weeks, God, would be a time of healing. God, that it'd be a time of awareness as well. That if there's anything that we've been carrying around with us, God, anything that we're blind to, anything that we've been pushing to the side, God, I just ask that your Spirit would show us, God, that your Spirit would reveal to us anything that we've been sweeping to the side. And God, I pray that as we wrestle through our own emotions, God, as we wrestle through our own feelings, that you would meet us in those moments. God, I pray that we would truly feel your peace. God, loss is difficult. Any loss is hard. And navigating a new reality is one of the most difficult things in this human journey. And so I pray that we together would be a community that is able to support one another. God, that this would be a safe, healing place for everyone. That we would feel like we aren't alone in our journeys, but that we are walking with others who will be there for us. So God, may we as a community be the tangible presence of Christ for each other. So we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.